Some of you may be familiar with Moz.com, used to be known as SEO Moz. This is one of the leaders in the search engine optimization space. Now, the founder of this company has started a new business that I am always endorsing. I am not an affiliate of this website in any way. I just love it because it's something I've been looking for forever. Now, to give you some background, there used to be this website called Klout. And what Klout did was it enabled you to look at the market and see how much clout or authority certain people had. So people that had certain followings, they had a lot of influence through certain channels, but that doesn't exist anymore. But what has come to replace it is something that's even better, and that is Sparktaro.com. So Sparktaro, it's free to a certain extent. I think you get something like 10 searches per month, and those you can keep redoing the same searches. So the capacity is very generous. And what it does is it enables you to figure out who the key influencers are that carry a lot of clout with your target customers. It enables you to identify which media sources your target customers are using, and to just generally put together what I would call an influencer marketing plan. It also kind of bridges into the space of PR. So let's take a look at how this would work. So the first thing is you want to create an account. So do that. I've already done it. And then you have to define your audience. So there are different ways to do this. You can define it in terms of what words they use in their profile, what social accounts they follow, websites that they visit, and frequently use hashtags that they have. Typically, uses these words in their profile. So for example, let's say that the target audience was medical doctors. Well, I might put MD here, or I might put physician, surgeon, something like that. So let's just try physician and see what happens. Okay, so it's doing the search, calculating the audience size, and we're getting some interesting data. So we start to see, okay, here are some of the social accounts that physicians follow. Here's the websites, hidden gems, which are perhaps a good starting point. Now, when you reach out to influencers, it's going to be hard to get those tier 1 people that are constantly being solicited, but the hidden gems might be an easier beachhead for you if you're just starting with influencer marketing and PR. Same thing, hidden gems for websites. So websites were maybe easier to get like a guest blog post. It's probably going to be harder with these hardcore ones. Podcasts, so you can be a guest speaker on a podcast. You can have your CEO guest speak on a podcast. That's going to be much easier than building up your own podcast from scratch. That's something that a lot of people say. You should start your own podcast, start your own publication, but not all of us are journalists and not all of us have the time to build up a massive following. It's much easier to just borrow a following that already exists. Similar course of action with YouTube channels, and then there are press accounts where you might want to work with a PR agent or something. So we're looking at physicians as the target audience. We can get some insights about the audience, so the size, certain hashtags that they're using. So all of this is very interesting. But where it really starts to get exciting is here. Look at the social accounts. So these are the social accounts that they're following. So this guy is a surgeon who's an influencer. Let's take a closer look at him. All right, so Sparktaro gives him a score. You can see that most of his following is coming from Twitter. So one way you could use this is you could reach out to this person and say, hey, we'd like to pay you to do a demo of our product. So you give this man $100, $75 to sit through a demo of your product to get his feedback. And once you kind of have some rapport with this person, then you can start to talk to him about, hey, maybe we're interested in paying you to talk about our product through a tweet. Right? He has a lot of clout on Twitter. He also has some clout on Facebook. So maybe you want to do a Facebook Live with this person where he's showing your product. Now, the way you reach out to influencers, it's not always explicitly sales oriented. It's not necessarily just talking about your product and paying them to promote your product. It might also be something that's a softer approach to marketing. It's, hey, are you interested in doing a joint webinar where we talk about solving a problem that the audience has? And perhaps your product sponsors that content. So there's kind of a spectrum of ways to work with these people, ranging from high-level content marketing, which is probably more appropriate for larger companies or companies that have a lot more funding, to more bottom-of-funnel things like product-oriented webinars, sponsored demos, things like that. Okay, so let's take a look at some of these other influencers. Now, you can see that some of them are brand names. Not all influencers are individuals. So influencers are often associations. Sometimes they're individuals. Sometimes it's a brand or a brand that's associated with an individual. It really depends. But let's take a look at this other individual. And we can see, okay, he has a pretty strong following on Twitter and Facebook, pretty minor following on Instagram. But this gives you some good ideas of how to reach the medical market through influencers. So this is the social category, but of course websites, which is a more conventional approach to get things like guest blog posts. You can look at some of these. Now Medscape, it's probably going to be pretty hard to get on there. So you might want to kind of start towards the bottom here. And here you need to upgrade your account to see it. But that's fine. I mean, try it out. Try out the free account, see if you get any traction. And if it's worthwhile and you want to invest heavily in the space, then you can upgrade. Podcasts, I think, is a great way to get started here. You can reach out to any one of these podcasts and say, hey, we want to be a guest on your show. And we have an expert who's probably the CEO of your company, who's an authority on some topic, and just offer to show up on their podcast. Now, sometimes it may be pay to play. So you need to pay to have your podcast or to have your podcast published with them, or it may just be a sponsorship, which I'm not a huge fan of sponsorships when it's just kind of the bulk of the content has nothing to do with your product or nothing to do with the problem that your product solves. Instead, it's just, hey, this is brought to you by brand name. Don't recommend that because the audience will just filter it out as an ad. It may work for some people, it hasn't worked for me. YouTube, you can see the most popular channels. Now, obviously, Mayo Clinic is probably not going to endorse your product, particularly if you're a startup. But if you're more established and you have a credible brand, it may be worth reaching out. Now, press, we can see, okay, so these physicians, they follow the World Health Organization, New York Times, CNN, Harvard Health. So a lot of big brand names. It's going to be a little harder to break in there. So when you're going after more niche markets, like smaller groups of people, what you're going to find is it gets easier. You're going to be looking at more niche publications, podcasts that don't have huge followings. It's probably going to be easier to get guest positions on these. So SparkToro is an excellent tool as an entry point into marketing that I would say has large economies of scale. So there is this bias in marketing that has been promoted by companies such as HubSpot. And again, I have nothing against HubSpot. I think it's a great tool. I use it. I think they have tremendous support. But this idea that inbound marketing and content marketing is everything, it leads people in the wrong direction because it makes marketers and SaaS marketers in particular think they need to be publishers. They need massive amounts of blog posts. They need these engaging ebooks. They need long research reports. The problem with that approach is you probably do not have a large audience. You are not journalists. You are not newspaper writers. But there are people out there, these influencers, these podcasters, these bloggers, who already have the audience. So it's much better to think about distribution. Okay, creating content is one thing, but actually getting in front of people is another. And the easiest way to do that is through key influencers. And the easiest way to find key influencers is using SparkToro. Now, what you might find is that a lot of the influencers that you're looking for aren't on here. And one thing that we know when we look at research from the University of Pennsylvania with Jonah Berger, who's one of the biggest names in the marketing space because he wrote the book Contagious. He has another book about how to change people's minds called The Catalyst. And what we know from him and from other research is that most word of mouth is offline. And that makes it a challenge when you're finding key influencers because it's very difficult to track offline word of mouth conversations. So then you're going to be looking at things like other tools. So meetup.com, where people that organize physical events. You're going to be looking at association presidents that host events and weekly meetings. A lot of the word of mouth engagements are going to happen there. Now, the other thing that you can do is you can manually look for influencers. So you can go to Amazon.com and see who's writing about your topic. So, for example, let's say that your SaaS has something to do with vegan nutrition or something. Well, you can see who's writing books on this topic. That could be an influencer. You can go to udemy.com and see who is publishing courses that your target customers are interested in. You can go to YouTube, see who is publishing videos. You can go to Google. So I would say SparkToro is the easiest, fastest way to get started, but there's also an element of manual research that you could be doing, especially if you want to invest more in this space, which I highly recommend.